I'm from the USA, but I live in Mexico. I'm living with bipolar 1 and borderline personality disorder. And supposedly ADHD, but I'm not too sure about that one.
Well, bipolar by itself, hypomania, can sort of get confused with ADHD. Is that what you think could have happened?
Exactly. I think so. My psychiatrist told me that sometimes when you've seen a lot of different psychiatrists, your chart sort of follows along with you and just your diagnosis keep increasing, even if you don't have all of those things.
So you think if you kept going to more psychiatrists to give you more conditions?
They'd probably diagnose me with lots of things when I don't have all of those things. Because my first diagnosis was actually schizoaffective disorder. And then they realized that it was just bipolar 1 with psychotic features, which I think bipolar 1 almost always has psychotic features. So,
Okay. So how did you find out? How was the process? Like, what happened first? Which condition affected you first, and what was diagnosed first, or was it both at the same time?
so I suspect they both affected me at the same time, but I was diagnosed first with bipolar disorder. My diagnosis of borderline personality disorder is only like 2 years old, so it's pretty recent. Um, because I started to suspect I had it, and I talked to my psychiatrist about it, and she said like, "Oh yeah, from observing you, you definitely have that. But the treatment is very similar. It's mood stabilizers, so we're going to continue with the same treatment."
How did you have an episode? Did you have a psychotic? Like in my case, I had a psychotic episode that was very definitive. Like when people tell me like, "How do you know you have bipolar?" I go like, "I know."
Yeah, especially when you have bipolar 1, because I mean, when you're having your episode, you don't really realize that it's an episode. Well, sometimes you do. Um, but once you get out of that, you're like, what the fuck has happened to me? Um, so I had a manic episode, and I thought the people around me were trying to hurt me. I thought I had superpowers. Um, I didn't need to sleep. I would stay up for 3 days and then sleep for a while and then stay up for another 3 days and then sleep for a while. Um, at first, it started off as a lot of fun. And when it was my first year of college, I started to present these symptoms of like not sleeping. I'd always had them, but I realized it was abnormal when I saw my peers like sleeping every night and just being completely different from me. I went to a doctor because my roommate caught me talking to the furniture and was like, "Hey, this isn't normal. You should probably see a doctor." And I agreed to see a doctor as long as she promised not to tell anyone about it. So she agreed. I went to a doctor and they were like, "Something's definitely wrong. We don't know what's wrong, but something is off here." And it got progressively worse over the semester, mostly because I would try and provoke these episodes. Like I started to realize if I drank lots of Red Bull and Monster, I could stay up for days at a time and study. And the episodes would start off as fun, like at the beginning of a manic episode, it's not always scary. For me, it gets like progressively worse. So when I start off, I'm just very high energy and things like that. And eventually, I just completely lost control, slipped into psychosis. When I went home for the summer, I was in a terrible state. My parents didn't want me to go back to the university. One day I got into a huge fight with my mom. I ran away from the house. And then as a punishment, she had me hospitalized. But even though she didn't have the best intentions, it did a good thing for me because I realized what I had and I was able to get it under control.
Did they diagnose you correctly at the hospital and started medicating you, or?
At first, no. At first, they were like, "This is schizoaffective disorder." And then after talking to me more and observing me for longer, they realized it was bipolar disorder. And they told me, you're not schizoaffective, you have bipolar 1. And also, I'm adopted. So they didn't have my family's like medical history. And I had recently come into contact with my mom, and she told me, oh, yeah, bipolar runs in the family. I have it. Your aunt has it. Your grandma had it. Possibly your dad has it. So, yeah, pretty much everybody has it. So I told this to the doctors, and they were like, okay, bipolar is very genetic. It's more likely this is a bipolar 1 episode.
Was that like the beginning of your journey to stability? I mean, how long was it? Did you ever have relapses, anything like that?
I had a lot of relapses in college, mostly because I refused to take my medication. My dad really pressured me not to take it. He felt like there was nothing wrong with me. And my grades were higher off the medication because the medication does slow you down a little bit. I I don't want to discourage anyone from taking it because it's what's kept me stable for the past 10 years. Um, but at first, there are some side effects. And some of those were that I felt slower, not so sharp. So I refused to take my medication. I had another relapse a year later and had to take a semester off from the university. And I started taking it again when I went to Mexico because I had a depressive episode, and I was working at a job where you had to smile a lot. And it seems like something silly, but my boss was like, if you can't smile and be cheerful, like, you're not going to keep this job. So I was like, okay, I need to get out of this depressive episode. So I went and took medication. I went with a neurologist instead of a psychiatrist. They prescribed me some medicine, and I've been taking it ever since. I kept the job, and then I quit like 3 years later because it was just a terrible job. I don't know why I stayed there so long.
And then the fact that it led you to the correct medication is, I don't know, it's sort of a blessing in disguise, even though it sounds like a terrible, crappy job in a way.
It was a terrible job. I mean, the job itself was fun. I was a kindergarten teacher, but the people I worked for were not so great people.
The borderline condition, how did that show up later on?
I realized I was very attached to certain people. And if those people were to like not even reject me, but just like in some way snub me, I would get very upset. Like I have my favorite person, and if she would tell me like I can't talk today, I'm really busy, I would be like, oh, she doesn't love me anymore. She hates me now. I must have done something wrong. Like I ruined all of my friendships, which isn't true. I have a very strong support system, which is one of the things that have kept me stable. But I realized that I had like this codependence on certain people in my life. So then I started to notice other symptoms, like where I would feel suicidal if I felt like someone was rejecting me, um, things like that. And then I learned about borderline personality disorder. I don't remember where. And I realized my symptoms aligned with that a lot. So I talked to my psychiatrist about it, and she said, like, oh, yeah, that was one of the first things I noticed about you. But when I went with her, I forgot to mention this. I had COVID, and for some reason, I had like very severe COVID, and it messed up my stability. So she was more concerned about the fact that I was in a mixed episode than about the borderline personality disorder. So she was worried about treating that. It was my first time going with her. So she treated that. And then after, she said, okay, now we'll worry about the borderline personality disorder.
Got it. You were in a mixed episode of bipolarity with both manic and depressive traits.
Yes. It was awful.
I mean, from what I've seen, it seems like that could be the worst possible expression of this condition.
I think so. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, and I never want to go through that again.
How was that like, the mixed state? Can you describe it in any way that one could understand?
I was very accelerated, just like when I'm manic. Like I talk very fast. I interrupt people who are talking. I have a lot of energy, but I'm depressed. I'm sad. I'm suicidal. Um, I I have the energy to get out of bed, but sometimes I just don't want to. I make very impulsive decisions. Um, I actually attempted suicide when I was in a mixed episode. Usually when I'm depressed, I don't attempt suicide because I know that I'll come out of it. But with a mixed episode, I get very impulsive.
Mm. Impulsive and negative. Those two things
Yes,
are there, yeah.
a bad combination.
Did you have a trigger? Because for me, a trigger was like I fell in love, which apparently is a very common trigger. But you seem like what you said is it just seemed to accelerate when you were a certain age. So you couldn't say that there was a specific trigger. Were you stressed? Was there?
I am, I I think I had this condition since I was a kid. I'm not entirely sure. It's hard to tell because of being in the foster care system. Sometimes kids present certain behavioral issues that aren't related to bipolar disorder. So it's hard to separate what was like genetic from what was just like a symptom of trauma. But a big trigger for me is not sleeping. If I don't sleep, I always start to get manic. So after like 2 nights of not sleeping well, I have to take a I don't remember the word in English. But I get mixed up with Spanish sometimes. I have to take a medicine to help me sleep, and usually clonopine, and that helps me get enough sleep so that I can avoid a manic episode.
So just absence of sleeping will take you there, even though you're medicated right now.
Yes.
Oh, okay. And what are you on right now? Just generically, is it antipsychotics? Like I'm on Seroquel and lithium, for instance.
I'm on Abilify and clonopine just occasionally. Abilify has worked wonders for me, but it has awful side effects. I don't know if I've been doing this in the video, but I move back and forth a lot. My hands and arms are very stiff. Like my first few weeks on it, I would wave like this, like a pageant queen, because I couldn't move them enough. It was awful. I had blurry vision, but it's gotten better, and they've added beta blockers to help me with the movements that I get, the akathisia.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's funny. It's everybody's really different. Like, I've been collecting reports of people saying like Abilify is horrible, like just complete failures. Yeah, I mean, it didn't work for me. I didn't like it at all, and I don't think it was actually working. I felt like I was going manic on it. Yeah, it's really, yeah, depends on each person.
It definitely does, because when I took lithium, it was hell for me. I got lithium toxicity. I went with a psychiatrist, and she prescribed me lithium, and I told her it wasn't working, so she incremented the dose. And every time I went with her and told her it wasn't working, she just gave me more and more and said, if it's not working, it's because you're not taking enough, because lithium always works. And so she prescribed me more and more.
Was she taking blood?
No, she didn't take blood work, no. And one day I just got like terrible vomiting and diarrhea. I got severely dehydrated. My dad had to take me to the hospital. And they said you have lithium toxicity. I quit my medicine cold turkey because that was when my dad was pressuring me to stop taking the medicine. Flushed it all down the toilet. and didn't take medicine for a couple of years after that.
Wow. Did you not have an episode? Leaving lithium is considered a very risky thing because it happens to cause episodes. Is that not, didn't happen?
I did have an episode, yeah. But I was at home and my family took care of me and I wasn't hospitalized that time.
It doesn't yet penetrate the culture that our condition is treatable. What's penetrated the culture is we're insane. And I go like, well, yeah, if you're unmedicated, bipolar one with a mania, you're probably very difficult. But the vast majority of people I know, with the support groups, with the people I'm talking to, like yourself now, we're all stable, and people just don't know that that's a thing, almost.
Exactly. I think they have like the idea of like a 1960s psychiatric ward, with everyone just going nuts and a free for all. I think in a way we're still in the dark ages when it comes to awareness of these illnesses. Like modern medicine is catching up. We're still not quite there. I think one day there will be better treatments for bipolar disorder, but I think the attitudes people have are still in the dark ages. Like I do get hallucinations still on occasion, um, even on my medication. And when I tell people like I just hallucinated something, they're like, "What? What?" I can tell my boss, for example, at work, if I hallucinate something, because sometimes I'll hear her talking to me and I'll go and answer her, and she'll be like, I didn't talk to you." So she's aware of it. My friends and family are aware of it. Um, but I have to be very careful who I let know because they just assume that I'm completely psychotic.
Yeah, I mean, so what kind of hallucinations you get? Mostly audio or visual or both?
Audio and visual. When I wasn't medicated, there was a scary shadow that would talk to me and say terrible things to me. I don't see that anymore. Now it's just like occasionally I'll see like a little mouse running by, or I'll think there's a dog somewhere, um, things like that. Or I'll just hear someone say my name and I'll answer them and nobody was talking to me. Very small hallucinations, not scary at all. Um, but the psychiatrist said that those probably won't go away.
Damn, and how do you know, how do you find out? Does it look fully real, or is there something that is a tell that you go like, oh, that's just hallucination somehow?
They disappear when it's a visual hallucination, they just disappear. So I was like, okay, that dog wasn't really there because dogs don't just disappear into thin air. Um, and when I hear someone talking to me, that's a little trickier because sometimes I'll go and I'll like answer them, or sometimes I'll ignore it, assuming it's a hallucination. And then they'll say, "Hey, I've been talking to you for 5 minutes. Like, what's wrong with you?" Um, but I think the audio hallucination happens actually to a lot of people, even people who are not neurodiverse. Sometimes hear someone say their name. So those don't concern me very much.
I've had audio hallucinations actually, kind of like command hallucinations, I suppose they're called, for weeks. Yeah, well, this one wasn't too terrible. Eventually, it became a bit bossy and mean. But initially, it was sort of like giving me directions. Sometimes it was helpful, other times not so much. Other times it was just playing jokes on me. I don't know.
Like the
Uh,
shadow.
is that what the shadow did? It would play jokes on you, like cruel jokes.
No, sometimes it would be very kind to me, and sometimes it would be like just cruel and want me to hurt myself.
Oh, okay, yeah, wow. But just like seriously hurt yourself, or like in a dumb way?
No, like sometimes it wanted me to kill myself. Like it would tell me to take all of my pills or to cut myself. I never did cut myself, but there was one day that I took too many pills, um, because I listened to the shadow, which was stupid of me. Um, but that's in the past, and I try not to dwell too much on it now because it makes me feel very ashamed.
What is it like in Mexico about mental health? Do you feel like it's evolving somewhat, or?
So, not really. It's evolved for people who have money. They have very nice places where you can stay if you're having an episode. You can the psychiatric facilities are really nice if you're rich. Um, but we also have like a public health system, which I'm sure they also have in Portugal. In the US, we don't really have that, which I have access to because of my job. But there, the psychiatric facilities tend to be very dirty, very unclean. Sometimes there's not enough medicine. Sometimes there's abuse from the doctors and from the guards. I've never stayed in one. It's one of my biggest fears, um, is to end up in one. So I'm very diligent about taking my medicine because I don't want to have an episode here. I would say that it isn't quite evolved for the general population, just for people with lots of money, which is true for a lot of things in Mexico.
And the tolerance you said is fairly low. Like, people wouldn't employ someone who's neurodivergent very easily.
If they said they were neurodivergent, no. So I never mentioned it when I applied for my jobs. Um, I was very careful to avoid talking about it. Um, and if I were applying for another job in Mexico, I also wouldn't mention it.
So you don't know? Did you ever go to a support group in Mexico or anything like that, where you met other people with mental health conditions?
No, but it's a little bit funny. I used to suffer from bulimia, and I was sent to a support group that was for people with eating disorders. And I ended up in a Narcotics Anonymous meeting instead because I got the time wrong. So I went to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, even though I have no problem like with addiction. And I saw that there was a lot of like overlap between addiction and mental health. So there were a lot of people there with bipolar disorder, with schizophrenia, with things like that.
Wow. Did you go back ever, or?
No, I never went back because I couldn't relate. Like they asked me like for my story and I was just like, I'm in the wrong meeting. I'm sorry.
So since you have, I'm just curious, since you have bipolar condition and borderline, do they interact in weird ways?
A lot. Um, so the psychosis is mostly from bipolar disorder, and a lot of my emotions dealing with people are related to the borderline personality disorder. And sometimes they'll interact. For example, if my best friend tells me off for something, my best friend is my favorite person right now. A lot of times people with borderline have a favorite person. If she just like tells me anything, like you should have done your homework, um, or just anything that makes me feel bad, sometimes I'll get like voices that tell me like she hates you, she doesn't care about you anymore, you ruin all of your relationships, you're a terrible person.
But they are uh, voice hallucinations. Definitely, they're not inner voices. They are hallucinations.
I think they're a bit of both. I get the inner voices a lot, but I also hear the hallucinations. Not very much anymore. This was more of a thing in the past. Um, but recently, I mentioned I have a strong support system, but recently, three of the most important people in my life moved away, like all at the same time to different parts of the world. So I expected like a relapse like that, and it didn't happen. And I think that's from the Abilify. I expected a huge relapse because I said like, how can like three of the most important people for me just leave and I'm fine? I was sad, but I was okay. Yeah, and I did cry. I still cry about it. I do miss them, but it hasn't affected my stability.
And the borderline day to day, does it? How does that for someone like me who doesn't have it? I get that it creates this sense of, like you said, instability, particularly dependency. And day to day, does it cause any other issues that?
It used to. Um, the people that I was close to had to talk to me every single day, or I would get very upset. Or if they didn't answer me right away, I would get very upset. If someone canceled plans, I would cry and say, like, you don't care about me, um, which can come across as very manipulative. And I think, in a way, people with borderline can be very manipulative, but I promise we're not that way on purpose. Um, but right now, it's not really causing very many problems for me, aside from, I think, the pain of those people that I love leaving is greater than it would be for someone who's neurotypical, but I wouldn't say that it's affected my stability.
But how did that? How did you get there? Was it medication? Was it therapy? Because I know there's specific therapies for borderline, right?
Yes, dialectical behavioral therapy. So the mood stabilizer, well, Abilify is an antipsychotic, but it also works as a mood stabilizer. And also the therapy has helped me a lot. And just like knowing that I can stay in contact with these people, and the fact that last year, um, in fact, when I first like contacted you through Reddit, um, I was on sabbatical. I took a sabbatical year to travel. And so I kind of had this idea like, I'm not leaving them because I don't care about them. I'm leaving them to follow one of my dreams. So when I came back and they all left, I had to feel the same way. Like I had to relate it to my own experience and say, they're not leaving because I did something wrong. They're leaving because they have dreams that they need to pursue just like I did. So my experience helps me to understand them a little bit more. But there's also the fact that people with borderline personality disorder tend to have like some emotional immaturity. So sometimes we'll act out like children act out. You know what I mean? Like, why do you always leave me? Why don't you love me? Um, and it's not because we're just terrible, manipulative people, even though I'm sure there are people with this condition that are. Um, just like with bipolar disorder, there's good and bad people. Um, I think that sometimes we just act out like small children do because we don't know how to control our emotions. And therapy's helped me with that a lot.
That's good. I mean, that's a tough one, right? Borderline is considered one of the toughest ones to.
It's one of the most painful in terms of like the emotional pain that it brings you. It's extremely painful. Um, I remember my first breakup, I felt like I was dying. Like it was just unbearable pain.
Was this when you were like 16, 18 years old, or?
Um, Actually, I was 25.
Ah, okay. And you, yeah, okay. But is it a depressive state or is it a different state that you go into?
It was depressive. I would say it was depressive. It was definitely a trigger for my bipolar disorder. So that's another way that the two are interconnected.
Yeah, the stress that comes from borderline can cause instability on the other side.
Exactly. So now I try to avoid, like you said, falling in love can be a big trigger. So now I try to avoid things like falling in love. Like keep that away from me. Um, that's a joke. I have a stable partner right now. And everything is just calm and stable right now. He knows about my condition and he tries to take steps to help me to stay stable as well. Like he'll tell me, you didn't sleep very well these 2 nights. You need to take something so that you can stay stable.
That's great. It's great to have a supportive partner. So you've experienced mixed states. Did you ever have rapid cycling as well, or is that?
Yeah, I have experienced rapid cycling. Um, but it's hard to separate the two. I don't know if this is too much information, but I usually, when I've gotten it, I was a lot younger, and it would be near the time of my period. So it was hard to separate that from bipolar disorder and just like regular PMS.
So it happens with your menstrual cycle.
When I was younger, it did. I haven't rapid cycled in a long time. When I was a teenager, well, before I was diagnosed, I suspected that I rapid cycled, but I was never diagnosed as rapid cycling. I definitely think that I had something when I was a child, because I remember the tantrums that I would throw were just epic. Like, my parents would hit me to try and get me to stop or put me in cold water, and I would just keep going. Like nothing could stop me. I would slam my head against the ground. Sometimes I would bleed, but I would keep slamming it against the ground. Um, I was, but like I said, I don't know if it was trauma related or if it was genetic.
Well, from what you said, there was a lot of genetic components that you found out later because you were adopted at what age?
I was 9 when I was adopted, and before that, I lived in foster care. And the foster homes in the U.S. are not always the best. There's a lot of physical, sexual, emotional abuse. So it's hard to separate the trauma from the bipolar disorder.
So, yeah. So did you feel even at the foster home you had these symptoms? You had like weird things that made sense later?
I remember not sleeping for certain nights. I remember some nights I just wouldn't sleep. Um, but my mom insists that I was a perfectly normal, healthy kid. But my mom is one of those moms that no matter what I do, like perfect. My adoptive mother. I could do something terrible and she would insist it wasn't my fault. So she's one of those moms.
Um, so did you? We already talked about it a little bit, but so what are the like key things that you think help make you stable? Like there was medication, there was therapy. Do you have things that you do in your day to day to keep you grounded as well?
Definitely number one is my medication. That's key for me. Number two would probably be my support system. I always have people that care about me and love me that I can contact if I need to. I think that's key. And I think a lot of people with mental health issues don't have that. And I think I'm very fortunate to have that. Another is therapy, and another is routine. So I try to stick to a pretty strict routine of going to the gym, of eating on time, sleeping on time, things like that. Even like my time for studying and reading, I have like planned out. Routine helps me a lot. And when I took my sabbatical year, I spent about 6 months in Europe, and I made sure that in each place I developed a routine.
Oh wow. Okay, so you even though you're temporarily staying, you found a way to get a routine going.
To make a routine. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you find that some doctors were way better than others, or did you always find that they knew?
There are some doctors that just absolutely will not listen to a psychiatric patient. And they can be like psychiatrists, but they won't listen to you. I had a doctor who was very hung up on me having schizophrenia because of the hallucinations. And I had to explain to her that bipolar disorder, especially bipolar 1, can produce hallucinations. And she insisted that only schizophrenia causes hallucinations. Of course, she works for the public health system here in Mexico, so go figure. And she wouldn't listen to me. She insisted. I mentioned a side effect that my medication was causing me, which was really embarrassing and I didn't want to talk about, but I felt like I need to mention this. So I told her and she said, "That's disgusting." It's like, okay,
What?
thank you.
This is terrible. Everything about this sounds terrible. So she just said
That's
que
disgusting.
asco, que asco. She
Yeah.
said like yeah.
Yeah. And she said, "Gasco." Do you speak Spanish?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm Portuguese, Brazilian, so uh, because I've lived in Portugal my life, se comprende un poco de español porque
Because of your proximity to
sí,
Spain.
está muy próximo.
Okay. Yeah, Spanish is my second language. Um, but yes, and the psychiatrist that I have now is just wonderful. She always listens to me. Sometimes she kind of puts me in my place because, for example, I'll come out with, "I've been stable for so long, I think I can stop taking medicine." And she's kind of like, "No, you can't." Um, so she can be very tough, but she's a good doctor and she listens to what I have to say. Even if she doesn't agree with it, immediately shuts me down. And I think sometimes we kind of like trick ourselves or gaslight ourselves into feeling like we don't have bipolar disorder when we've been stable for a long time. It's been so long that I've been stable that sometimes I feel like maybe I was misdiagnosed. Maybe I don't have anything after all. But it's because the medication is doing its job.
Yeah. So did you ever stop the medication because of this kind of thinking?
No, because no, not recently. When I was younger, yes. But for years I've been taking it religiously and I definitely think about stopping it, but I won't do it. I won't risk that. I don't make any changes without my psychiatrist. Like the good thing about um finding someone that I trust is that even when I don't agree with her, I know that she has my best interest at heart and she's not going to tell me something that's going to hurt me. So I don't lower it, I don't raise it, I don't do anything to my medication without her telling me to do it. I have a question for you. Do you ever feel like the medication affects like your creativity? Because I'm also like a writer and sometimes I feel like I'm more creative or I was more creative when I used to have manic episodes.
So yes, to answer your question, yes, I'm absolutely uh, could say that I'm more creative, but I'm also worse at getting things done. So that is the balance that I see. Is like when I'm on my current medication, I can start and finish something, even if it takes 3 months. You know, and in mania, there's no way I can focus on anything longer than an hour or two. And if I'm not getting the results that I want, I just go and do something else that I remember. So I think that's the balance for me is it's a bit slower. The creativity is still there. I don't think it's gone. And but it's just more you can stretch it out. You can do a marathon, you know. The mania is just like you're running really, really fast and you'll beat everybody on the 1 mile, right? But you can't run 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers. And I think life is full of marathons. That's my understanding.
I would agree with that. It's definitely hard to concentrate on one thing when you have mania. I remember I once took Adderall while manic. That I was able to concentrate on what I needed to do, but the hallucinations after were not worth it.
Adderall gave you wild hallucinations.
I was already manic when I took it, so I don't know if it was from the Adderall or from the mania, but I was messed up.
Yeah. Did you come down from that okay?
Yeah, I came down from it. They just upped my Seroquel dose. I never told the psychiatrist what I did because I was like, she's gonna kill me. This was a different psychiatrist, not the one I have now. This was when I was still in college and I was studying for exams and I had enough energy to study, but I couldn't concentrate. So I said, I'll try some Adderall. And It was the worst idea ever.
You didn't do that again.
No, never again. I got good grades on the exams, but it wasn't worth it. 2 out of 10 would not recommend. Yeah, my last semester.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about other people. I'm curious. You've told people, I'm sure, and you've gotten all kinds of reactions, right? We get all kinds of reactions. Some people go like, "Oh, that's cute," and other people go, "Oh, you know." So, what are some of the strongest reactions you receive from people, positive or negative?
The worst one was a friend who told me she didn't want to talk to me anymore when I told her about the hallucinations because can I swear on this podcast? Yes? Okay. She told me I was fucked in the head. And that hurt a lot. Another friend I met while manic, and when I came down from the manic episode, she didn't want to be friends with me anymore because it was when I started to take medication, and she said I was no fun on the medication. Um, but it's better for me because those kinds of people don't actually care about you. Um, Positive reactions um, are that sometimes I meet someone else who also has bipolar disorder and we form a connection because we understand each other. One of the most common reactions, though, is that people want to like take care of me. Like they worry about me. They ask me if I'm okay. Um, One of my friends actually had me move in with her. Um, they, especially like older people in my life, because most of the people I associate with are older than me. They worry about me, and I've gotten like almost parental figures from them. Um, and it's good for me in a way because I don't have a good connection with either my birth family or my adoptive family. Um, but it's also negative because of my borderline personality disorder. I need to learn to be more independent. And this just encourages me to rely on others more.
I asked this question even though I know the answer, but in popular culture, do you think bipolar and borderline have you ever seen a depiction that you were like, oh, this is pretty accurate or anything like that, or mostly just inaccurate?
Um, Definitely that. I can't really think of any movies or anything. Maybe there was a movie when I was in college about a roommate who had either bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, and she tried like killing everyone. And I was kind of like, are you serious right now? Like, thank you for adding to the stigma. Um, but in general, I don't really watch a lot of things related to that.
Yeah, so basically, you haven't seen anything accurate either with bipolarity or borderline.
It would be interesting for me to see a movie where they're comorbid, just like me, because um, my psychiatrist told me it's actually very common for bipolar and borderline to be comorbid. So I would like to see how they managed to depict that.
Hmm. So if you could put out an image for the world of like what bipolarity and borderline together is, if you could make uh, that happen, that people could see what you would say is an accurate portrayal, what would that be like? What do you think? What do you think you would try to change about these depictions?
Um, I would like people to understand how painful it is. But I would like to get rid of the depiction that we're like crazy and violent. Um, that if you break up with us, we'll kill you. Things like that. Because it's just not true. I just don't think these conditions make us violent and nasty. I think that sometimes I'm sure it can if it's untreated, but I think that sometimes people are just violent and nasty without having it.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah, exactly, yeah. The 95% of the people with these conditions are stable, and they're nowhere near these depictions of insanity that make for good drama, I guess. But aren't realistic, I don't think. So I often ask about this. You've had these hallucinations, the shadow, the auditory. Did you ever have any impression that the condition, the experience you were having was almost mystical in any way?
Yes. Um, I used to think it was a gift from God back when I believed in God. I didn't believe that I was actually sick. Um, and I thought that I had certain powers. Like I was convinced I could move things with my eyes. I could see sound waves. Um, Now I realize those were delusions and hallucinations. But I felt that God was blessing me with this gift. And it's interesting because right now my birth mother decided to stop taking her medication. And she told me to stop taking mine because she told me this is a gift from God. Um, and you are like squandering his gift. You need to love this gift and protect this gift. And I just kind of say, yeah, sure, mom. But I won't stop taking it. But it's interesting to me that we both had the same delusion.
Yeah, sounds like almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
That's like almost like it was genetically imprinted that you would
Yeah, I
have
thought it was
this.
interesting.
Wow, that's the first time I ever hear of that. Yeah. Um. So, but did you ever? Was there anything in these episodes that you found helpful? Like you actually went like, oh, actually, the fact that it encouraged me to do this or I did this, that was really good. It actually gave you confidence in yourself, or something good came out of it at all, or
Yeah, a lot of times. Usually it's what encourages me to write a new book. Um, it made me make a career change when I needed one. Um, Things like that have encouraged me. So I sometimes make decisions that I know are the right decisions, but I just don't have the strength to make them when I'm not in an episode. So there are times when something is happening and I know what I should do, but I just can't bring myself to do it. And I think I wish I were manic right now.
yeah. So how did the career change, for example? How did that work out? Were you changing medication, or were you having a relapse?
It was like a small manic episode. I don't know if it would be considered hypomanic. I'm not sure if bipolar 1 even gets hypomanic. I think we're pretty all or nothing. Um, but I was definitely euphoric. They had just lowered my dosage of Seroquel when I was still on Seroquel. And I started to get very euphoric, also very impulsive. And the boss did something terrible to me. She like fired me and then unfired me just to kind of teach me a lesson. And then I was just like, you know what? I quit. So I quit impulsively. And then I got a job at a much better school. So it was a good decision for me, even though it was made impulsively.
And then, how do you think professionally? How do you think it affects you, the condition?
Um, so it would be a lie to say I don't have my good days and my bad days. You know, I think even when you're stable, you have good days and bad days. So there are days where I can't like bring myself to have the same level of energy that I usually bring to my classes. Um, and also, in terms of the borderline personality, I feel like I get overly attached to people. And that affects me professionally because sometimes those people can be like a coworker or my boss, and I can feel like very attached to them and want them to be with me all the time. Um, so right now I just experienced that because two of the people who left were former bosses of mine, and I looked at them as like maternal figures. Um, So that affected me professionally because I was just so sad to see them go, and returning to work after my sabbatical without them was really hard. But I would say that professionally I do very well. Since I started working at the school that I'm working at now, I got like promoted. So professionally, it affects me, but in general, I do very well.
Is there anything you'd like to say about your journey?
Um, I would just like to say that it's not an easy journey, which you know perfectly well. But for anyone who's listening that might have it, or maybe they're not stable, or maybe they suspect they have this, or someone they know has it, it's a very difficult journey. Um, but it's worth it to try and be stable, because your quality of life is so much better. Taking the medication is worth it. Going to therapy is worth it. Doing everything you can to take care of yourself. And it's important to put yourself first sometimes, above work, above anything else, to make sure that you're in a good place.
Yeah. I think it took me a few years to realize, like, oh, I have a chronic condition. There's no way around it.
It's a hard pill to swallow.